Hello, this is your instructor, Russ, again. And this week is week 7 of our course. And we just finished with doing our PowerPoint speech. I hope you had a good experience with that speech. And now we're ready to move on. And what we do for our next speech, the third out of 4 speeches that we'll do in this class, is a different kind of speech. This one is called the TED Talk speech. Many of you have seen a TED Talk. TED stands for Technology, Education, and Design. And typically you see these on YouTube. They're typically 15 to up to 30-minute presentations. And this one is where you have to pretend that you are speaking to an audience, but it's being recorded and then possibly put on YouTube or some other type of platform for other people to view. The other thing that's different about this particular speech than the last one is that we are going to be doing a persuasive speech. So it's not just information that you're giving us, but it's information for the purpose of persuading. So we want to talk about that a little bit today in our video lecture that we're doing. You're going to be reading 2 chapters for this week, chapter 12, which is on language and using words well, and then also chapter 16, which is our chapter in our textbook about persuasive speaking itself. So let's jump right into talking about persuasive speaking. And one of the things that you need to know is the definition of persuasive speaking, because I know a lot of students, a lot of people in general, have a misconception about what a persuasive speech is. They say, for example, you can only give a persuasive speech to people who think differently than you, and that's not true. The definition of persuasive speaking really helps us out here. And that definition is to try to persuade or convince someone about a topic in which you're trying to do one of 2 things. You're either trying to change the audience's point of view on something, that's an audience that disagrees with you, or you're trying to reinforce the audience's point of view. That's primarily an audience that agrees with you and that you're trying to convince them to do some kind of action to support even more strongly than they already support something. So it's important, I think, for us to revisit something that I've talked about before, but that's important for you to know, and that is there's 4 different levels of persuasion, of information, communication that we do. And it's important for the persuasive speech to know that we're reaching all 4 levels. Now, one of the levels is the level of knowledge. And that's where you were primarily with your PowerPoint speech or with any informative speech, is you're simply wanting to know, what does your audience know? What don't they know? How detailed can I get in my presentation? Or how simplified do I need to make my presentation so that the audience would primarily know the information that I think is important for them to know, and to know it in the order and the way that I want to present it. So knowledge is the first level. That's the superficial level. The next level is the level of belief. What does your audience believe is true, is false, is right or wrong? You could test this out by creating what I call a belief statement. You could pick a topic and then you could write down a statement or tell someone a statement. I believe that such and such is not right, or I believe that such and such is the right thing that we should be doing. And then you could see if your audience then agrees or disagrees. This is doing a little preliminary survey or questionnaire, finding out what your audience believes or doesn't believe. They might agree with you, have the same belief as you. If so, that's great. If they don't have the same belief as you, then one of your jobs as a persuasive speaker is to try to convince them to believe the same that you. Give them enough evidence that they will agree that something is a serious problem and needs to be changed, or something is correct and just simply needs to be reinforced. The third level, after knowledge and then belief, is that of value. How valuable is this belief? And how valuable is the topic? Typically, this would be a type of question that would be put on a scale. Imagine that there is a line, a spectrum, and on one end, this topic, their perspective, your point of view, is something that is inconsequential. It's not important at all. That's one end of the spectrum. And on the completely other end of the spectrum might be, this is the most important thing in my life. I'm really, really passionate about this, about doing something. Now, you need to know where on that spectrum the audience is. You should be on the passionate side of this. You're wanting to do something, but you don't know where your audience is. If your audience also is very passionate with you, they have some knowledge, they have the same belief as you, and they have the same value as you in the topic, then that's super. And you don't need to worry about knowledge, belief, or value. You can go right to the fourth level, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But most of the time, your audience either has very little value in this topic or your point of view, or they frankly don't care. So either they don't know enough, that's the first level, that's their knowledge, or they believe differently than you, or their value is different than yours. They don't know about things, they don't know enough to make a decision, or they don't care about it, something like that. Fourth level that you want to get to, that's the most important, is their behavior. What do they do? They might agree with you on the first three levels. They know something about the problem. Let's use recycling, for example. They know that recycling is good for the environment. They know that. They believe that people should recycle. They agree with you on that. Their value is that this is a fairly important thing. They think, yes, this is something that we need to be concerned about. We can't just pass this off to the next generation. But then the telling thing is then to ask them the question, so you think it's important and you know about recycling, so you recycle, correct? Maybe, maybe not, right? So their behavior might not fit what they say their value is. So your job then as a persuasive speaker in that case is not to give them knowledge, not to change your belief system or their value system, but it's to encourage them, to motivate them to actually do something. In this case, motivate them to recycle, motivate them to use environmentally friendly materials that maybe disintegrate, like using paper straws instead of plastic straws, something like that. So it's important that we know those four different levels. You make a decision then based on your interviewing, your questionnaires, your surveys of your audience, what it is that they know about. Now, if you don't know your audience or don't have an opportunity to interview them, then you're just going to have to assume, I guess, that they don't know very much, that their belief system may or may not be like yours, that they don't really have the same value system, and they're not really behaving in the way that you want them to behave. So you need to really try to address then all four of those levels in your persuasive speech. Your persuasive speech for this assignment, by the way, is talked about in detail in week 8. It's not talked about here in week 7 on the blackboard, but it is talked about in week 8. I recommend you look at that assignment, because you can go ahead and start working on that now, even though the speech itself is not due until the end of week 9. This is week 7. You do need to get started on it. There are some specific things in the assignment that I'll go over in more detail next week in my week 8 video lecture for you. But go ahead and get started by looking at that and making some decisions on what it is you'd like to talk about. The next thing about persuasive speaking that I'd like to talk about is the kinds of audiences that you will encounter. And you'll have one of 3 kinds of audiences that you'll encounter. And it's important to know which kind of audience that you think you'll have. You'll either have a friendly, hostile, or mixed audience. So let's talk about what each one of those 3 audiences are. A friendly audience is one who primarily agrees with you. In other words, they have some knowledge of the topic. They also have a similar belief that you do, and their value system is close to what your value system is. And that is for the most part. You can't expect 100% of your audience to be friendly. There might be 1 or 2 people that might disagree with you, but by and large, people agree with you. So you should know then that your audience, that your goal, your aim is to get them to behave a certain way. Now, another type of audience is a hostile audience. This is one that primarily disagrees with you. Maybe they don't know a lot about the topic, or perhaps probably their belief system is different than yours. They think something is not correct or not right, and you think it is, or vice versa. Or perhaps their value system is that this isn't important at all, but you need to convince them this is very important. We need to do something now before things get worse. And of course, then they would not be behaving in the way that you want either. The third kind of audience is a mixed audience. You have an equal number of friendly and hostile, or perhaps you don't really know the audience. And that's kind of what the case will be for this speech, because you're speaking to a TED Talk audience that might be someone watching a video of this. So you don't know who's even watching, how many people are watching. So you really don't know a lot about your audience. You're going to have to then probably assume this is a mixed audience, some that agree with you and some that disagree. The next thing you need to know about are what I call persuasive motivators, things that motivate people to make a change, to help convince them to change their perspective, their point of view. Aristotle gives us these, the philosopher from ancient Greece. He said that the primary persuasive motivator is ethos. We've talked about that word before, E-T-H-O-S. Ethos means your credibility. Are you believable? Can I trust in your judgment in what you say? And of course, this ethos is determined on lots of things. Sometimes it's on nonverbal things. Like, for example, in our culture, you look at someone when you want them to believe you. Look at me in the eye and tell me that, we say. And you're looking at them to see if you can tell if they're really being truthful or not. You can believe them. That's ethos. That's why in this speech, especially, eye contact with the camera is going to be so vital, that you don't want to be reading your speech off your note cards, but you want to be looking right at the camera and convincing them. Right? The way that you pronounce words, the words that you use. It's important then in chapter 12, using words well, to select the right words. If you use, for example, the definition of someone who is fighting to liberate a country or a people, you might call them terrorists because they are blowing things up with bombs. Or if you're on their side, you might call them a freedom fighter. So just the very definition of what words you use sometimes will help build your ethos and will tell your point of view. The second kind of persuasive motivator is called logos, L-O-G-O-S. Logos, of course, is the root of the word like logic, logical, and that sort of thing. And it has to do with two things. It first has to do with supporting evidence. The use, in other words, of things to support what your claims are. And the primary ones are using facts, using statistics, using some kind of testimony, which might be a quotation, a direct quote, or a paraphrase, and or it might be the use of examples. And you find these in different sources. Now, for the PowerPoint speech, you were limited to using the online newspapers. In the case of this TED Talk speech, you have to use the Bellevue Library database. And so you need to learn how to do that. And I'll go over that in more detail next week when I go through the specifics of this assignment, this speech. But for now, you need to look at that so you know where to find supporting evidence. The second part of logos is the use of reasoning. That is deductive, inductive type of reasoning. If you have this claim and this claim, how do you get to that claim? Well, you start with premises. I'll present to you premise A and premise B. That'll lead me to my conclusion, which is a claim. You start with a warrant, and that is you make a statement that says something, and then you back that up with evidence. That's what is meant by the use of reasoning, thinking things out in a process, being process oriented, and that's going to be something you'll need to do in this speech as well. The third kind of persuasive motivator is called pathos. And pathos is the root word of things like sympathy or empathy, and it has to do with with our emotions. And so an emotional appeal to people, sometimes by the words you use, sometimes by the use of music. In watching a movie or television show, the background music really is the pathos part that's convincing us of something and is really moving us emotionally. So those are the three motivators. Aristotle said that ethos is the most persuasive of those three, followed closely by logos and then pathos. And you need to use all three of those in your persuasive speech, and we'll talk about how to do that. The third thing I wanted to talk about today is the organizational pattern. How do you organize this persuasive speech? We looked at the informative PowerPoint speech, and we said that you could organize that in several ways. You could do it chronologically, showing a time-based type thing, a step-by-step process, you might say. If you're giving a demonstration speech, you have a certain step you have to do first, then a second step, then a third step, so on. That's chronological. You might have used topical, which is really the usual way that we think about things, or the typical way we think of things. You could use spatial, where you're describing something from a certain point of view, a certain angle. That's a descriptive type of organization. Well, for persuasive speaking, you will primarily use either problem, solution for your two main points, where the first main point is the problem, second main point is the solution, or you would talk about problem, cause, and effect. And in this case, if you read over week 8, you will see that your two main points that you have to use are cause and effect. Now, you need to describe the problem in the introduction of the speech. We'll go over that in more detail next week. But then your two main points have to be the cause or causes. What caused this problem? What are the causes? And then secondly, what are the effects? You don't have to come up with a solution to this problem of how to solve the problem. You simply want to make people aware that here's how we got the problem, here's the cause of it, and here's what's going to happen if we don't do anything, or here's what's going to happen if we do solve the problem. And you're going to implore your audience to help come up with a solution and to do something about it now. Don't wait till later. So you need to get started today or this week by looking over week 8 and the directions, especially the list of possible topic areas. Be picking out a topic that you could do, start doing a little bit of research so you know something about the topic. And then I'll tell you more next week in more detail about how to get really down to, the figuring out the logos, the supporting evidence that you need, how to organize this and put it together, and how to present it. Even the delivery is a little different than the way you would present your PowerPoint speech. There's no, other than just the speech itself, there's no extra things that you'll need to do for this speech, such as use of PowerPoint or any other type of visual aids. If you'd like to use those, you may, but it's typically not done, so I wouldn't worry about it for this speech. The time limit is, it says 4 to 5 minutes on the instructions, but I'm going to give you an extra minute, so you can go 4 to 6 minutes. So you're doing a 5-minute persuasive speech on one of the, the agreed upon topic areas, and then you're going to need to persuade us, your audience, using a TED Talk style. So we'll talk about that. Read over my announcement for the week. It gives you a lot more details. Read over chapter 12 and chapter 16 so you can be ready for the quiz on that this coming Sunday. So hope you have a good week. If you have any questions about anything, again, don't hesitate to contact me and I'll get right back to you. So this is your instructor, Russ, saying so long, and we'll see you again next time.